Welcome everybody to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. It is Business Monday. We are here with Cha-ching, Gary Sass, the money man. You've been off gallivanting around a little bit, taking advantage of all these Monday holidays and no broadcast. And what do you do? Just sit around counting your bitcoins and things like that?
No, I just make sure my mutual funds are doing okay.
It is a big week to talk about financial issues in the state of Rhode Island. The governor came out with her budget. It is it's got some twists and turns that I think people did not anticipate, although give the news team here at GoLocal a little credit. First to report about the issue of sports gambling coming out of the New Jersey lawsuit. I think we had that story about 3 weeks ago, and an interesting proposal with a lot of questions, and we've got a little more information I'll share with you. But what was your take on the budget overall?
Well, you know, John Carroll in Alice in Wonderland had the Cheshire Cat say this. I'm going to quote the Cheshire Cat. Imagination is the only weapon in the war against reality. I think that pretty well summarizes it.
So that was a strong endorsement on the fiscal tightness of Governor Raimondo's budget. So let's go through some of the issues. I'm going to go broad-based first and foremost. Is this just a typical governor running for re-election budget? In other words, I'm going to throw out some things and then kick it over to the House Finance and let them do all the work?
I think there's an element in the budget, and it's not just in the proposals, but it's the way the budget's funded.
Yeah.
So the governor talks about no broad-based tax increases, but there are plenty of tax increases in this budget. There's cigarette tax increase.
Right.
You know, more importantly, the sales tax is now extended to security services.
Right.
It's extended to software for service. So Microsoft 365, you know, could go to meeting. All these things are, you know, are taxed.
Yeah, the cloud technology is taxed, and when reporters asked during the budget briefing, what does that mean? Literally no one in the budget briefing could even vaguely give any insights as to what that meant.
Well, it means that a very new form of commerce and communicating, we've decided to tax it. Other states tax it as well, but if you're looking for competitive advantages, you've just given up competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, so that in there, and then there's all kind of financial gimmicks in this budget. Sports betting, I think the governor's probably right. I think the Supreme Court will hold it as being legal, but this is the first time I can ever remember somebody including $23 million or even $1 in a budget with no legal authority to collect the money. And so that's more than a holding place. The scooping of places like Rhode Island Housing, the Student Loan Authority, Rhode Island Resource Recovery, you know, the list goes on. Transferring, a few years ago we increased DMV fees significantly.
Yeah. And
that was supposed to go into a transportation improvement fund. No, it's now in this election year, it's going back into the
general fund.
In the general fund. So, you know, that, the gimmickry, you know, talking about no broad-based tax increases when there are tax increases, the expansion of the marijuana dispensaries, expanding the definition to acute care. If you go, I have one question, I don't answer it because I can't answer it. If you go from 3 to 15 dispensaries, who are the people with the 12? You know, you talk about money man. The money man has no part of that action. I'd like to know who does. So those are all indications of an election year budget. And then when you get into some of the statements made on a program side, you also have the same reaction. Medicaid.
Yeah.
Everybody recognizes that we have extremely liberal Medicaid programs. Almost a third of the state of Medicaid recipients. We spend about $2 billion of our budget on Medicaid, that's federal and state. And so the governor rightfully says, I'm going to cut it by $165 million. But she doesn't cut it by $165 million. She reduces the pay to providers. That's not sustainable.
Right.
I think you have to talk about making the program more efficient, you know, block granting the program, having more flexibility, using our great clout in Washington to try to get some you know, treatment so we can use the money more effectively. Going back and looking at, you know, some of the things we do support with Medicaid, some of the things we can't. Kentucky just put a provision in their Medicaid program, which you can do now, a work requirement. And so, with the exception of the co-pays, which are very modest co-pays in the Medicaid program. Most of the cuts are not cutting Medicaid, they're cutting the amount of money we pay to people who provide services to Medicaid recipients. And you can do some of that. Some of them may have been overpaid. I think the guaranteed profit for managed care companies, Neighborhood Health, United Community Programs, etc., maybe we shouldn't guarantee them a 1.5% return, but we make out pretty well for managed care programs. I don't know what the kind of cost-benefit analysis was done there. So you have that. That's an election year budget saying I'm cutting Medicaid when you cut providers. Rhode Island Hospital is going to be up in arms. My calculation is that Rhode Island Hospital is losing somewhere between $5 and $7 million from these changes. Well, if you can't go out at day one and say technology, innovation, healthcare industry is a primary target to grow this economy, and you look at some of the investments that have been made by Commerce Rhode Island, and then cut the soul out of them.
So, well, if Lifespan's going to lose 5 to 7, Care New England's going to probably lose 3 to 5, and if they're losing 3 to 5, there's not 3 to 5.
Yeah.
They've already lost $120 million in the last 24 months.
And doing what the upper payment limits, which give them a little flexibility to put some more money, Medicaid money in. So yeah, so the language is I find interesting. We're cutting 165 from Medicaid. No, you're not. You're cutting 165. You pay people to service Medicaid recipients. Some of that may be justified. A lot of it's going to put these agencies in harm's way. That's political. Education, I get a great kick out of the education budget. This is the education governor. Well, there were programs that were expanded. You know, they expanded the pre-K program, computer science education program, another $260,000, another $1 million each for each of the universities and colleges. But if you take all those innovative programs, that's less than $5 million.
Yeah.
When you look at state aid is probably growing by about 13 to 15 million. The general aid program is probably grown by half of that, 7 or 8 million, and yet the communities that get that money are going to get a bill because they have to kick in more to the retirement system. So, you know, where is the additional money for education? We have some very interesting programs, but they're small programs, but the big dollars that affect the property tax bill that you pay to support schools are not treated particularly well in this budget.
She came up with a plan for $1 billion. It kind of reminded me a little of Austin Powers, $1 billion for school rehabs. The plan, the analysis that came out in September by, I think, a pretty smart group that analyzed what the need is, came up with a need at about $3 billion and counting. I think you could probably spend $2 billion in Providence alone. I think those numbers are a little low. They've got a replacement cost at Classical High School of $76 million. That seems low based on what we saw nearly 10 years ago of rebuilding the middle school in Woonsocket, which I think went over $110 million when all said and done. So we've got all this pent-up demand. It's not all her fault, but when you really break down the numbers, it really only looks like it's about $250 million in new spending, and that's all a general obligation bond. So cost of borrowing taken into account. Was this a little bit of a sleight of hand by the governor of saying $1 billion when it's $250 of GL funding?
Well, I would never characterize anything the governor did as a sleight of hand, but it's certainly may have exaggerated.
That might be the nicest thing you've ever said about it.
No, I say a lot of nice things. I think there's some good things being done, but I think to sell it as a $1 billion program, when you break down the numbers, and if you just say, give me a minute to break down the numbers, there's $250 million that may or may not be put on the ballot for the people to approve. That's fine. There's another $50 million over 5 years that we put into the school building fund, so that money would be available. So that's $300 million in theory. And then you come to the rest of it and you start to scratch your head, because the $80 million that she counts that is currently being paid, in some cases reimburses communities for building projects they've already undertaken. So you can't spend that money twice. And then to suggest, well, somehow communities, the 36 school districts, 39 cities and towns, the people will approve local bond issues for $300 million, really belies the reality of what these property taxpayers are facing. There are all kinds of fights going on between the appropriating people, the taxing authority in communities, and the schools trying to get what they feel they need for the kids, the taxing authorities getting pressure from seniors and others about constantly increasing property tax rates. So to count $300 million that will be approved locally before it's locally approved, maybe putting the cart before the horse. But you're right, we need to fix up our schools. The $250 million bond issue, I'm not even sure the legislature will keep it at $250 million, is a legitimate, investment. But what it misses, I think, is can we just put money into the old system for fixing up schools? If we're gonna have a school building authority, should the school building authority talk about a statewide facilities plan and mandate certain things on communities? And question, you mentioned and you gave examples of schools in the inner cities, classical and I
literally dozens of them across Pawtucket, Central
Right.
Falls, Providence,
and you look
the
at those,
urban corridor.
you look at some of those buildings and you wouldn't want your
Nope.
kids to be in some of those buildings. So, what happens if the wealthier communities are more aggressive in looking for these dollars? How is any of this needs tested? Where is the greatest need and the least capacity to meet that need? And so I don't know how the governor's gonna, figure that in, but just to put a big number out and then not talk about fairness of distribution, need in distribution, equity of distribution, is an interesting question.
I don't remember a bond issue over $200 million. I don't even remember, I think around 150 or something like that is the highest bond issue that I remember. I remember we did an environmental one around 120, maybe one of the education ones were around there. This is a big number to take to the voters in an election year of dissent and wrong track and all that sort of stuff. So do you end up with zero?
Well,
you would.
Well,
you go up or down.
I'll give you some information at the Hasselville Institute. We're in the process of putting a poll together in the next month to try to poll some of those questions on schools and school finance. But I think it's a bold move. I think it's generally a good move. I think it's unfortunate that we're having this conversation about not being clear in how much you're really going to raise and what you can buy with it. But we've had study after study after study, which demonstrates the need that we need to invest more in our school buildings and school facilities. And every student should be in a school that's environmentally sound. Every student should be in a school that has the right kind of
technology. I mean, we're falling behind drastically. But we've got buildings that are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old.
But I see where I have confidence, the fact that we need the money and we need to make the improvements. Where I think the jury is still out is where the devil is. If you get that bond issue, how are you going to pick winners and losers? How is need going to be measured?
Well, let's go to the bond issue for a second. First of all, big ask. One time, can't go back for another 2 years. And you're talking about $3 billion in need, and $250 million might get you 2 high schools and 2 middle schools in the state of Rhode Island.
Well, but the point is, when you look at it realistically, you just mentioned that 250 was the biggest bond issue in your memory. We just have a certain amount of financial capacity.
Yeah.
So I think that's not an unrealistic proposal. But I think how the money is spent becomes very important. Should we be make every school environmentally sound first? Should we making sure that the rain doesn't come into the roof of every school? What are the priorities? If we're going to spend $250 million and we wake up 5 years later and it's spent all over the place,
right?
It's not clear what we bought for that money. So I'm not concerned about the 250. I'm not concerned. I think the governor's on track and looking at finding.
Do we make the mistake regularly? It seems to be in Rhode Island. I know it's been historically a huge problem at the colleges and universities, in which we build things, but then we have no budget for maintaining them and keeping them at top tier, top performance. There isn't the most basic levels of maintenance budgeted for sustaining. We invest in a $50 million engineering or $100 million engineering center, but then there's no ongoing budget support to keep that facility pristine.
An obvious problem, and it's a very obvious problem with schools, because the expense is a shared expense between the state and the cities and towns, and a lot of cities and towns just don't have the fiscal capacity to come up with money for maintenance. And likes to admit this dirty little secret, but as you have to negotiate with the teacher unions, you have very little money left to maintain your school buildings.
Let's jump over one thing that clearly the dialogue changed about the PawSox. The speaker said it, others said it, which was, listen, if we're going to do $1 billion for schools, however you want to compute it. That's needed, and the Paw Sox took a little bit of a hit on that. It was interesting, neither in the governor's State of the State nor in her budget documents was there any mention about the McCoy Stadium rehab and replacement into the Apex site.
Yeah, I find that surprising because it's a major issue. I think the issue gets more attention and more importance than it deserves, frankly. But
way more.
But it's it's an issue that is in front of people. There's been criticism in the past of the governor giving lip service to it, but not using political capital. Now she's apparently willing to use some political capital on it. Yes, I was surprised.
I don't think she's going to put political capital into it. She came out of polling in December. I don't think this. I think they got results similar to the Della Volpe poll, not dissimilar from the Fleming poll, and that this is not a popular project, and it's not where people want to spend their money. And listen, there's a lot of commentary in social media about it. Those that defend it, and I'm going to say it straight out, are generally male and a much older demographic, are the group that have any interest in building the stadium, other than the unions and the owners.
Well, I will say this to you, and I don't have a strong feeling, so I have no position on the stadium one way or the other. But you don't do government by poll.
Yeah.
You know, if the leadership, believes that it's an appropriate thing to do, that's the first question you have to get around, and apparently they do. Then the second question is it a good deal? They, Senate obviously believes that they tweaked it. They think it's a good deal.
They might have made that deal worse for the taxpayer.
That's a possibility.
It's about 15% more expensive for Rhode Islanders.
But
16.
Your point of why it wasn't discussed relative to other priorities is it's a good question. I don't have an answer for that question, but it just seems.
Isn't it now quick? It's almost political quicksand for everybody.
Well, see, you've been around this. I have not looked at this thing, but now that you got the governor pushing for it, the Senate feels very strong about it. Labor's trying to use their muscle. To the point of going into the speaker's districts.
I got to tell you, it was Paw Sox driven. That's generally a death sentence. I mean, if you want to make a speaker mad, go and leaflet, drop mail, and hold meetings in his or her. We've only had his on the speaker side. Generally, legislative leaders don't appreciate it. By the way, rank and file members of legislators and city council members don't like when people try and pull that. That's the fastest way to kill a project in the city of Providence is go and jump into a city council ward without getting the approval of the council member.
Now I understand the mayor in that community is against the Paw Sox Stadium. I hope I'm not speaking in error, but if they can have a meeting down there, you have every opportunity if you're anti it. You pack that meeting.
Oh, absolutely. And Steve Frias was out this weekend. Steve Frias, who lost to Nick Mattiello by less than 100 votes, was out going door to door this weekend. I'm told that he got very strong support going door to door in Western Cranston. That's a fiscally conservative area, and I think Mattiello has heard that from his voters as well.
Well,
you don't have, when you win by whatever it was, 88 votes. You don't have a lot of margin for error.
Whether you agree or disagree with the speaker and whether you like or dislike the speaker, you have a much better way of getting what you want by using honey, not vinegar.
Yeah. I've not seen too many speakers who appreciate being publicly embarrassed and politically embarrassed. Generally not a winning scenario.
And I thought it was interesting the way the memo came out on whether or not you could hold a referendum on that issue.
Yeah, right.
Because there's nothing in the world that I know of that would stop a legislature from putting a non-binding referendum on a ballot.
Right.
And
now certainly you couldn't trigger the financial obligation via the deal.
No one ever suggested you could. It was just to get the feeling of the public as to whether they wanted you to trigger that obligation or not.
Any other aspects of the budget that you saw was especially interesting? I do want to go to sports betting, and listen. We've read a lot about it over here at GoLocal. We've written on it. We've talked to some folks down in New Jersey who are members of the Christie administration. The first person that wants to put bet on a Supreme Court decision might not necessarily. Supreme Courts have a tendency to do whatever they want to do. And I remember when they outlawed the ban on gay marriages a few years ago, nobody had that as the possible scenario.
You're better off betting on sports in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's right.
That's for sure.
So that seems, and it seems that it would be. Now, here's an interesting number that Kate Nagel got from the revenue folks. They expect in the first year $831 total $1 million spent in the sports gaming. Now, all the states are going to do it, so you're not going to win any out-of-state people. I mean, all the states are poised to be able to issue this. So if you're going to take $830 million in new sports gambling, and I guess some of it's in illegal gambling and sports books, I'm not sure that's all going to transfer over, but let's just say $400 million of it is new money. How is that not going to affect the lottery and the gaming at the two Twin River facilities?
It has to.
It absolutely has to, and at a much lower percentage. It's only at like a 4 or 5%.
Is that what I heard?
Yeah, it's tiny.
Yeah, no, there's, if you believe, and sometimes this is proven to be incorrect, but if you believe the public has just so much disposable income to use on gambling, and sports betting is more attractive, they'll, instead of buying a scratch ticket,
Right.
Which is not a growth industry. Lottery is not a growth, the traditional lottery is not a growth industry. They will may go bet on sports gaming. Instead of going and pulling a slot, they may put their $5 on a ball game. At least the slot they lose their $5 in 30 seconds. On a ball game, take them 3 hours, so it'd be more entertaining. It's those things. I don't know the answer to those things. I do believe this. I think there's two ways to look at it. There's a policy question of whether or not we should be using marijuana in sports betting to balance the budget. That's what we've come to.
Well, you're one of those moralist Southerners,
there's nothing wrong with
Bible belt banging. Right. Yeah, of course, right.
There's nothing wrong with having values. But
up here in the Northeast, we're about sin. We're about smoking our marijuana and making some money off of it, and a little more extra gambling.
Well, you remember Merle Haggis song, "We don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee, Oklahoma." But no, I think that the issue with that question, and people can have different opinions, and people can have different. I mean, you can have different opinions on what the facts are, what the best estimates are. But why would you include the money in a budget with all these questions outstanding? Now, maybe the administration has done their homework. They have answers to these questions. I wouldn't suggest they don't. But we put almost $24 million in the budget, and right now it's illegal to collect that it. It may become legal in 9 months. And you could do all the preparatory work ahead of time and not violate, which I think is an important principle of budgeting. Don't budget money that you can't collect, whether it's $1 or $23 million. And then they chose to do this because they feel they can know what the Supreme Court's going to do.
Let's head down to Washington, D.C., your other home. Let's see. Last week we had a government shutdown. Not today. So what changed that we no longer have a government shutdown? And who are the winners and losers in this whole thing?
Well, there are no winners yet because the continuing resolution is just till February 8th.
Right.
There's no final decisions. I think the winners, and I think this has some implication for the elections in Rhode Island, I think the winners on this are really the moderates in the Senate.
Yeah.
Whether the Democrat moderates or whether the Republican moderates, they finally, got together and crossed the aisle and worked with each other. So whether it was Senator Flake or Senator Collins or Senator Manchin or Senator Heitkamp, you saw for the first time, and it's going to be hard to put this genie back in the bottle,
yeah.
but you saw for the first time that there were center-right Republicans and center-left Democrats that ignored the extremes of their party. And it's interesting. Schumer I've always considered to be a kind of he's liberal, but not a progressive liberal. Not true in the House. and he was able to work through that.
Well, it's interesting, you know, when I worked down there in the late 80s and early 2000, that's the way governing went, especially on the Senate side. There were gangs of 7 and gangs of 9, and Rhode Island always had John Chafee as one of the members of those, and John Breaux from Louisiana, and this group of, you know, couldn't be more different in many ways. John Breaux from Louisiana and John Chafee from Rhode Island. But they're the ones who forged most of the major agreements on most of the major bills that were pending before Congress. But things got done.
And it's too early to say with a certainty that that's going to happen again.
Yeah.
But at least there's a light that these people came together and didn't force anything, but got people to at least a temporary yes for the next 3 weeks. And we'll see how it works out. You know, the deal was we'd open the government up, we'd extend child insurance program for 6 years, and have a debate on immigration, you know, balanced debate on immigration. So I think that's the positive thing. There's some hope there that we can govern. We're not going to govern from the extreme right. We're not going to govern from the extreme left. It's going to have to be some kind of bipartisan, you know, group, people that can work across the aisle. And if I can get a commercial, can I get a commercial?
Yeah, please.
You know, I think that's part of Bob Flanders' campaign.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go a little bit back. You were guardedly optimistic on tax reform. Now we're about a month later, 6 weeks later. It's looking pretty good.
I think we're doing okay.
Yeah.
No, and it's not. You know, it's not perfect.
Right.
There are a bunch of compromises in there. There are certainly political considerations. There are fiscal limitations on what you can do. But I think it's a real credit to the private sector. They have stepped up. You know, whether it's through bonuses or through expansions. And you know, don't believe for a second that they were going to be that generous. You know, without having some money in their pocket.
You saw Apple repatriate $38 billion, bring just in tax payments, bring back $250 billion from overseas.
And a lot of financial institutions are going to have a little blip because they're going to have high tax bills this year, so the profits won't be as strong. But you know, it's working. You know, Walmart increased their starting wage. I won't call it a minimum wage to $11. What's the minimum wage in Rhode Island now?
10.
I think it's going to go to 11.
Yeah.
So you have all these signs that you know, supply side is working. There are going to be some downturns. We've given up some flexibility, but all the Democrats and all the liberals that were bitching about tax reform, I can't hear them right now.
Well, one journalist in the Rhode Island market was complaining about how it was a tax program for the rich, and the person who was chatting with him said, well, you're going to give back all the wins on your 401k, and they declined to take that offer up.
Oh, even in the corporate stuff, we know 35% goes back to labor, probably 65% of capital, but it's a mixed bag. Your individual circumstances are going to determine whether you do well or not, but every study that's come out, even for the Tax Policy Center, which is a credible group, but a left group associated with Brookings, said 80% of the people are going to benefit from this. Some of the more conservative people think 90% are going to benefit. So yes, there's going to be a significant benefit.
One last thing. We talked to the Tax Foundation last week. They could not determine yet what the implications are for the states in any state-by-state standpoint. And they certainly were not willing to explicitly make a determination on what the implications are for Rhode Island state budget. There are some states that they see as definitely getting a windfall, but Rhode Island, because of its tax structure and some of the other implications.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I chaired the commission that recommended the changes in the income tax structure. We were so piggybacked onto the federal that if the federal government sneezed, Rhode Island got a cold. So we restructured our system not to be as dependent on federal decisions, and so it's a pretty independent system. Let's see how some of the corporate changes wash out and see what some of the definitions are. Maybe some impact there.
Well, Mr. Moneyman, we greatly appreciate it. We are glad you are back. We'll see you next Monday. We're going to hold off your Super Bowl prediction till next Monday.
Okay.
All right.
Look forward
After
to
you
it.
look at some film footage and also check out their payroll caps, you look at the cap structure probably
No,
more than
no,
actually the game film.
No, I look at which team has players from some of my favorite colleges. That's the team we root for.
Money Man Gary Sass, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We're going to take no break today, and we are going to jump over. Don't forget your piping hot tea. And we're going to jump right over to Mr. Innovation, Saul Kaplan. Is he here? Is he in the house? Is he in the country? Is he in the hemisphere?
He's here. Hey, Josh.
Great to see you.
You missed me, didn't you?
Well, I terribly missed you.
I know you did.
We had cut out cardboard fill-ins. We had
Good.
socks puppets on.
Probably more articulate.
we had dangling puppets. We had marionettes. We had everything. You had a good trip?
I had a great trip. We were in Thailand for a couple of weeks. First time we'd been there. What a marvelous country. Just so interesting. And we explored different parts of it. And my son, who's living there, we get to spend some time with him. So it was great.
That's great.
I'm still recovering from the 12-hour.
Oh, yeah.
It's been over a week, and I'm still.
That
still
flight back that way
Nuts.
is a brutal one.
Brutal, yeah.
So lots been going on.
Yeah.
We'll save discussions of the Patriots and the URI Rams for the end of
Okay.
the half hour.
Okay.
Let's jump into all the crazy things that
Lots
are
of
going on. Let's go Amazon HQ2 just to start
Yeah.
off. Rhode Island, nor any of its sub-applications, the Pawtucket Central Falls
Yeah.
application did not make the top
Yeah.
20. I
Yeah.
believe most everybody expected the Pawtucket Central Falls to make the list. What's your take on the final 20?
Well, first of all, I mean, I'm glad the state put their hat in the ring. I'm glad we went after it. I'm glad we shaped a proposal. You know, because you have me on tape. I never really thought that we were viable as a standalone bid. I always, from the beginning, thought that we should be pushing a regional approach, and I still do.
Yeah.
You know, so
Charlie Baker disagrees and says, "To the victor goes the spoils."
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see whether Boston can win. Whether I think Boston's approach would be strengthened greatly by a regional approach, because I believe that what Amazon needs is to improve their political footprint. Right? They need, they know, that they're going to be under increasing levels of scrutiny, from state and federal government that can affect the future of the business. So I think that's what this HQ2 thing is primarily, secondarily to tap into talent in other parts of the country. I still hope that we aggressively try to extend and strengthen Boston's bid, because it's in our best interest.
Absolutely.
To have this investment here in the region, and we will benefit if that happens. So we should be supportive of.
Listen,
of helping Boston.
TF Green's already
Yeah.
got a windfall of 500 or 800 jobs from logistics support for one of
Right.
Amazon's sub-entities. Are the numbers, and I don't want to jump around too much, but are the numbers for Amazon going to force some federal regulatory action? Let me give you two numbers that we reported while, excuse me, while you were away. One is that overall retail had decent numbers. It was up in the final 9 weeks of the holiday season, 5%. Half of that is expected to go to Amazon. Half
It was
of the
huge, right? I think I saw some of that data.
Here's
just
some-
a huge proportion of the retail, in fact, went through the Amazon platform.
Well, and
Unbelievable.
digital was up 18%.
Right.
And so brick and mortar was actually down.
Right.
But the scariest number is for every dollar of online shopping, Amazon captured 89
Almost all
cents.
of it.
Almost all of it.
Almost all of it. So, did you see the New York Times piece on Jeff Bezos? That kind of profiled him and said
Right.
he's trying to increase his public. He knows this, right? He knows that this thing has gotten so huge that it has societal implications, at the local level and at the federal level. So to think that he can, get away with kind of the ostrich approach, it's not
Right.
going to happen, right? So they know this, so they're starting to make those investments, and I think the HQ2 move, how they've handled that, the phone calls that they made, even to those folks who didn't win, like they're really paying attention to those relationships. And so, yes, I do think there'll be increased scrutiny. There's inevitable pushback on every move that Amazon makes, just from the sheer scale of the thing.
Sure.
And so I think you're going to see them make significant investments on the policy front, the government relationships front, both local and federal. We're just getting started to see them do that. But meanwhile, their success is just amazing.
They've already
Absolutely amazing.
announced it was either, depending on which press report you want to take, they're looking to lease 500,000 to 1 million square feet of office space.
I saw that. I
in-
saw a
in
million.
Boston. Yeah.
I saw a million, and then I wondered whether is that a consolation prize, for them?
Well, they just took a
but-
big block in New York City for almost, I
Right.
think, I mean, I think it's happening almost, I mean,
So Boston's a big winner, almost regardless of
Correct.
whether, they're even larger winner if they get a chunk of the HQ2 piece. But that's 1 million square feet. In Boston is a huge investment in addition to what they already have, right?
I think if you picked up half the retail sales growth for
You can
total
afford-
holiday season,
Yeah.
you can lease a lot of space in a lot of cities.
Yeah.
Amazon Go, I think,
Yeah.
just came online.
Yeah.
You walk in the store, you walk out of the store, you never touch a cash register.
No one at the cash register.
No one at the cash
Like,
register.
I read that article. You just put the goods in this bag.
Yeah.
They have sensors and cameras everywhere in the store, so they know exactly
Right.
what and to me this is what
Shoplifters are going to get billed whether they want to or not.
Yes, that's right. They'll automatically debit their account. I see this as an example, and this is why Jeff Bezos is so impressive, because they experiment every day.
Yeah.
They are fearless about taking technology and new capabilities, combining and recombining them to change the customer experience.
Right.
So that Amazon Go store
Yeah.
is just new capability that they're working on. They put up some experimental locations to see what does that deliver that's valuable to a customer, and they'll see what happens, and they'll double down on stuff that works, and they'll stop doing stuff that doesn't. Right? This is what innovation is all about. Right? That's why it's so impressive. You've got to constantly experiment with not just incremental change to the way it works today, but transformational approaches to it. And Jeff Bezos does it every single day. I love that Amazon Go story. Who knows whether they scale it?
Yeah.
Who knows
Could
what they
be
do with those
implemented at
capabilities?
could be in Whole Foods in a year.
Absolutely.
Right. There's no delay in his implementation of major technology advancements. It happens once he proves it and feels comfortable with it, and those things are implemented.
But the key is, I always use the technical term, try more stuff.
Yeah.
Right? And we beat
Is that the technical
we-
term?
That's the jargon.
Yeah.
You actually have to try more stuff if you're going to innovate. And we beat that out of ourselves in our organizations, in our communities, because we're so afraid, that someone's not going to like what we try or it's not going to work. And Jeff Bezos doesn't care about that. He's going to try more stuff and do
Well, he's
more
also
of what
now
works,
the
right?
richest man in the world. At
He can afford to do some
Yeah.
experiments now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But he was always that way. I mean,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Even when that thing was at its early stages of growth, that's his formula, right?
Right.
He takes technology, he figures out how to improve the customer experience, and then he experiments with it. He doesn't bet the farm on them. He tries it. I read something that says that he spends his time, and every CEO should do this. I mean, how many CEOs do you know, that spend every day on the nitty-gritty stuff today?
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos spends almost all of his time on stuff that isn't going to come to market for 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
Right? So he's investing in the future. He has plenty of leadership that can focus
Sure.
on the day-to-day, stuff and the quarterly earnings and all that stuff.
Right.
He focuses on what's next. That's the CEO's job. I thought the COO's job was the day-to-day stuff.
Right.
But yet I see CEOs of large enterprises that are running the day-to-day operation, and when you ask them about what's next and what are they experimenting with, they're not focused on it, and they haven't built the systems and the structure, to be able to do it. That's why Amazon is having the success that it's having.
When do the feds, though, at some point? I mean, I know we're in this massive laissez-faire regulatory environment under the Trump administration, right? regulatory reviews are 7 seconds. Most regulations and departments like EPA are being rolled back at record. But at some point, federal agencies that look at antitrust issues are going to start taking some notice with this massive
of course.
level of implication to how Americans. Now, one of the big tests of breaking up situations like that is if they generally don't want to, if the consumer is being benefited. And right now, the consumer is being benefited, the consumer is being benefited, the consumer is being benefited.
Right.
But at what point does the community as a factor, less jobs, dying retail?
Right.
We've started to see it already. 5,000 people at Macy's laid off. Sears and Kmart down to emaciated levels. When does that start to take have an implication?
You're already starting to see the backlash, and you'll see it with Amazon. You see it on all the big tech companies. Facebook is facing this.
Yep.
You saw Mark Zuckerberg recently, really start to begin to own up, to the implications of this incredible global platform. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more he needs to do, and that Facebook needs to do, but it was unbelievable, to hear the reflection, on, hey, wait a minute, maybe there are some implications for this that are not good for society, and maybe we have some kind of obligation, in order to do something about it. It was just the beginning. We'll have to see what that.
One of the interesting things he did was reset the algorithm to push third-party, both brands and news sources, out of the news feed and devalue those things. One, to just get out of the dialogue of fake news versus left versus right versus everyone. So let's get out of that game of trying to arbitrate what's real news, whose news is what. Nobody trusts any news according to Pew. I thought it was an interesting take, and we see it as a benefit. I'll tell you, we're seeing that our numbers up. I know most news organizations are seeing them down. You got to create content that's of value to the local community. If you create, you don't worry about your distribution. That algorithm changed 3 years ago at Christmas. But if my reader values it and shares it, it's actually now got more value than before. I'm sorry that the piece from CNN or some other AP story that's published in 5,000 newspapers across the country gets devalued. So I thought that was an interesting take. I think news organizations are missing the game on that.
But I think you're going to see a lot more of that. I mean, the other thing I saw a week or so ago, BlackRock, the big private equity firm, huge, right? They come out, and again, we'll see whether there's some there. Right. But they came out and they said, look, of course we're going to continue to look for investments that return to our investors, and they should. But they're adding the and. They're saying you've got to do that, and you have to have a purpose that's in the best interests of society. And they're saying we're going to adjust our portfolio and make decisions going forward.
That seems dangerous, right? Your value system and my value system. Clearly, the value system of many Americans have different gradations of gray. We see it in who's the president of the United States and who many people thought was going to be the president of the United States. So, your anti-gun manufacturer investment may be, what are you talking about? That's public safety for me and my wife and children when we're at home alone. And boy, oh boy.
No, it's always in the eyes of the beholder.
Right.
Like who values what and where the real value is. But to just ask the question before you make an investment. Is there a purpose here? What is it trying to do? And they get to make the decisions because they make the investments. Right, and they're investing on behalf of all the folks who park money there, all the pension funds and all the other, capital investors. I think just asking the question about let's hold these investments accountable to doing both things. They're not mutually exclusive. I think we're going to see more and more of that, and I frankly think it's a good thing. Right?
Let's talk about a company that 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, was the annual selection for the most respected company in the world, General Electric.
Oh my goodness.
And it just gets worse every day.
What is like half of their shareholder value?
The Denda is trading at $15, $16 today. They've still got sell posted against them. May have to raise capital for their pension unfunded liability, which is now in at $31 billion.
Yeah.
And Triad, the big group that's sort of led to all this, is looking to break up the entire company into specific segmented driven elements.
Yeah, well, it looks like that might happen just under its own weight. I mean, the whole financial services thing was just a disaster, and the new CEO inherited, this overhang in the insurance business
Right.
that required them to take a write-off that was just outrageous.
Yeah.
Right. And
They
so
didn't seem
it
to
just
manage the message. The street seemed to get caught off guard. They weren't ready for this amount
That's
of
right.
bleed out.
That's right.
There was a total disconnect from his entry
Yeah.
commentary, which I think you deemed less than exhilarating or directional. And is it just so bad that there's no credible story or credible strategy right now
I
until
think that's right.
you hit
No, I
bottom?
think this insurance, the write-off that they had to take for the insurance business, it's kind of the remnants of their financial services days, was unexpected.
Yeah.
And you're right, there's nothing Wall Street dislikes more than an unexpected downside.
Yeah.
And you get punished for that, and it's really hard to recover. So this new CEO just keeps getting worse and worse for him. He's going to have to make way more significant changes. He's going to have to batten down the hatches and pull this thing back. And then you're absolutely right. This has been my point all along. What's the go-forward story? What's the future-facing story? I mean, how many things can we connect to the internet
Right.
with IoT, and where's the value going to come from?
Right.
To truly be a digital company, and trying to combine we're an industrial company and we're a digital company. Well, they didn't make that transformation fast enough, and they should have been moving much more
Is it,
quickly.
Joe? I mean, it's not 24 months ago. I think it's almost exactly 24 months ago that they were moving their headquarters to Boston, that they announced they're moving their headquarters to Boston, that they were repositioning as an innovation company.
That's
the
right.
commercials were young millennials who were coming to work for the company, and
Right.
it was all about digital and all about technology, and now it seems to be as fast as spiraling. What the fate of the Providence office is here is
No, Boston. I mean, they're worried about but they made a major commitment to Boston and the headquarters, and
They've already pared it down
They've
once.
slowed that
Yeah.
down. So the Rhode Island commitment, which was pretty small,
Right.
in comparison.
Connecticut might be
Yeah.
saved just by
Yeah.
the failure of companies being able
Well,
to
this is a
execute.
major restructuring, both from a capital standpoint, an employee standpoint, and a market positioning standpoint. And I don't see the narrative yet, with the way for them to turn this around. And this insurance thing that just happened, was a really bitter pill for these guys to take. It's kind of sad to see. I mean, this was one of the as you
Greatest
say,
companies in the world.
Greatest companies in the world that didn't move fast enough to transform itself. And I also think it's the days of these conglomerates where you're just a smart, financial investor with a portfolio of unrelated businesses,
Yeah, right.
moving chips around the table. There's no story there. To be able to do that. I mean, you've got to be able to leverage assets, across entities and quickly reassemble them in new ways to change the value equation, or you're not going to be able to survive. And GE did for a very, very long time, and now they're paying a heavy price for not moving fast enough.
Let's jump over to the innovative company who should be at the end of the year. I think it was Business Insider, might have been somebody else, had a slideshow of all the changes that took place in the previous 12 months at Uber. And if there's one senior person left in that company, because it was just gone, replace so-and-so, gone. It was literally almost the entire organization was flushed in the course of 12 months.
Yeah, they lost a big chunk of their market cap too. Although I think the market cap, was
inflated.
Was significantly inflated.
Yeah.
It was like a tulip festival.
Yeah.
Waiting to see when it would crash, and then it did, and there were some underlying reasons for that. So I think with Uber, the story is a little bit different. I think they do have a really exciting business model that still has a ton of upside and growth potential.
Yeah.
Right. They messed it up, with all of the silly management, antics, and some of the things that that really put their market position at risk. I think they made a smart move in terms of bringing in the new CEO. I don't think it's similar to GE. They did lose a lot of market cap. It was pretty inflated. They did some capital raises. At Uber, like I scratched my head and say, what are they doing? Like just to drive up, just to see what the market will bear.
Was
But
this
they had-
last infusion of cash from SoftBank, was that, they needed it? Was that desperation cash?
No, I don't think it was desperation cash. I think that they had to restructure the capital structure a little bit. So I think that they're playing with that. But I think those are mostly tweaks.
Mhm.
I think the market cap will settle down. They've got to get back to their knitting on driving this business model around the world. Interfacing with local communities. They still got backlash in a bunch of communities.
Yeah.
Just around the displacement of the liveries and the taxi cab drivers and all of that. But I do think they're still on an upward swing in terms of the value they're adding to customers. And you know me, that's central. It's always about what's the customer experience, what's the value the customer gets through the lens of the customer.
Right.
And Wall Street doesn't always get that right. And so you have to really watch customer value, which is why I like what Jeff Bezos does and what Amazon's doing a lot. But I think Uber will turn this around, but it has to be painful for a lot of institutional investors that rode the Tulip Festival up.
Yeah.
And then
And
watch
now
it come crashing down again.
That's real money.
For them it is.
Yeah.
For them it is.
Is it time for Lyft to go public? And take the
timing.
grab the space?
The timing for going public is always about, what's the upside in your business? How do you capitalize that growth? And what's the right structure, to be able to do that? So, I don't know whether it is or isn't the right time. I don't think they're having trouble doing capital raises to support their growth. We've got to see where it levels out in terms of Uber and when, how much share they're going to be able to continue to take. And now there's some other, ride-sharing platforms
absolutely.
that are starting to come into it. I mean, this is a big growing market, right? Because the existing transportation solutions have been awful, and now technology helps us put new solutions in place. I think you're going to see many new business models continue to come into the space.
I think last week maybe I drove my car once. Every other movement I had was on an Uber.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to the office, back home, to the PC game on Saturday. I mean, it's
Good
just
for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's 100 times more efficient.
And that's Rhode Island, where
forget Boston.
Where there's not a lot of options. I mean,
right.
You go to a big city where there's a great. We were in Bangkok, Thailand, on vacation. Incredible transit system. Obviously the critical mass to be able to pay for it.
Right.
And enough people to jam into these into these trains. But it was incredible. We never drove anywhere within the city. Like, we took mass transit the whole time. A little bit harder in a smaller place like Rhode Island. I know a lot of people would love to have better mass transit solutions.
Yeah.
We don't really have the critical mass in population to support the capital to do it. But without that, you still look at Uber and Lyft and other ways to get from A to B.
Yeah.
And you look at the parking situation, to come downtown.
No, if you want to park for the
anywhere,
day, it's somewhere between
makes incredible sense.
14 and
we do it a lot now.
Yeah.
For a while we weren't using Uber or Lyft a lot. All of a sudden now, hey, let's leave the car at home. Let's take Uber. It'll be safer. We can go out. We can have a glass of wine. We don't have to worry about it. Yeah, absolutely. Why wouldn't more people do that?
Let's jump over what's new at Biff.
We're busy right now. We've started the year in a really strong way. Obviously, no surprise to you. Everybody needs to innovate now.
Yeah,
right. It used to be I had to work a lot harder to get people to have the conversation about how do you avoid being Netflixed, right? And how do you make transformation safer and easier to manage? And now all of a sudden, more and more leaders, more and more companies recognize that they have this challenge. They don't want to play defense waiting to be Netflixed or disrupted. And they know their current innovation approach is only producing incremental change, right? So that's the space we live in. How do you transform? how do you make it safe and easier to manage so you're not bidding the farm, but like Jeff Bezos, you're doing the experiments,
Right.
to figure out new ways to deliver value. So we're really busy, and it comes from surprising places. More and more education leaders, know they need to transform their models. Healthcare is almost a no-brainer to think about this, because the existing model's not sustainable. And I'm optimistic, even in the public services space, that we're going to have more government leaders, and more big NGOs realize that it's just not sustainable, and we've got to be more centered on citizen experience to change that. So we're really busy right now. It's knock on wood, no complaints. It's good to be busy.
We're going to hold the Patriots Eagles prediction till next week, but let's talk about the your Rams. Long way from the Rusty Cordova era at Keeney Gym.
Yeah, that's right.
We are now
That's
a top 25 team in the United States.
Well, I'm always hesitant to talk to you about it because I'm afraid to jinx it. But what an incredible start to the season. I mean, you knew they had all the pieces,
Right.
In place to do it,
Right.
And hopefully they stay
Healthy.
relatively healthy, heading in. But a 7-0 A10 conference start. I don't think they've ever done that.
Never.
And
I don't think they've ever gone 2-0 in the A10.
Yeah, again, I don't want to jinx it, but I don't see who beats them in the A10.
Yeah.
Because I'm watching, and I think I think they're really, really strong. They should position
Some
themselves
argue they're
well.
the best, deepest backcourt in the country.
Well, they are nationally good, and they should do very well in heading into the tourney, and they should do well heading into the NCAAs. I mean, you have to predict that they don't just make it, but they make it with a decent seed. But we got more than just a handful of games.
Yeah, there's a long
play,
season
yet to
ahead.
play before that happens. But it's really nice to see. I encourage all Rhode Islanders. You don't have to be an alumni like me, to get behind these folks. We've got to support our state's flagship, university.
Well, I'll also say
the
this:
success.
it's probably the best gym.
Yeah.
It's one of the best gyms in the country.
It's a fun
to
place to watch a game.
To watch a
isn't it?
game, yeah.
It really is.
Especially when the students
We're
are in
gonna
the
go down
place.
and see the Duquesne game. I think this Saturday we're gonna go down. But go Rhody Rams.
All right, stay right here. Want to thank everybody for joining us at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Our friends at Deepwater Wind, we always appreciate them. And tomorrow, Ava Gaudet has Arts and Entertainment, and Kate Nagel is back with News and Politics. This is a big week. We've got, I believe, Speaker of the House is on this week. Stephen Pryor's on Thursday, and Governor Raimondo will be on a special session turning on at 2:30 on Friday. A time change. It was originally going to be 3. It's going to be a 2:30 edition. So lots going on here on GoLocal Live. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you back.